we doing? Kind of, it's obviously a rainy day. I appreciate you coming out. Hopefully everyone's doing okay. The crew, you're missing some of your crew. What's going on?
I know, it's crazy.
Yeah, we're normally on Tuesdays, so not everyone can come today. At least two of us can.
That's true, right? Two of the crew are here, right? We have Oliver, and we have pink hair.
Pink hair, yeah, I'll go by that.
No, what? So what is remind me your name again?
Nikki.
Nikki. We have Oliver and Nikki. Good to have you. Good to have you. All right. So a couple of quick announcements. You've probably been, hopefully you've been, on iCollege. You're starting to study for Exam 1, which is live today. So Exam 1 is available for you to take today if you wanted to do that. You have all the way until Tuesday by 11:30 p.m. to complete the exam. I highly recommend that you don't wait till the last minute, all right? So there's no extensions, there's no partial credit, right, for Exam 1. Use my notes and the PowerPoint slides as a guideline. Make sure you read the textbook, watch the videos, but other than that, you should be golden for the exam. It should not be too difficult. But any questions about that? Any questions about the exam or what we're doing in the next couple of days? So today we're talking about the introduction of sound, chapter 6 in my book. And this chapter that we're going over today will be on your next exam. It'll be the first chapter of your next exam. So exam 1 is going to be, off the top of my head, it goes the invention of cinema, the international expansion of cinema, national cinemas, Germany in the 1920s, and then the Soviet Union in the 1920s. Those are the 5 chapters that will be on exam 1. And of course, all those chapters are broken down for you on iCollege. On Tuesday, no class, right? No class, no need to come in. I want you to be able to not have to stress about the exam, right? So if you're waiting until Tuesday to take an exam, hopefully you'll take it early in the morning or midday, right? So that if you do have technical issues, and that won't be that big of a problem, you can take it later on that evening, right? But everybody's good with that? Everybody understands what's going on? Excellent. Very good. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here with our warm-up questions for the day. What is your favorite, since we're talking about sound, right? So we're talking about the introduction of sound. So we're around the 1930s-ish, right? Late 1920s, 1930s. This is when the technology for capturing sound is starting to be used in the filmmaking process. What is your favorite film soundtrack? Does anyone have any film soundtrack examples here? Yes, go for it.
Probably Blade Runner, Ghost in the Shell.
Okay, Blade Runner, very synth, right? Heavy on the synths. You got some, like noises in there too, like industrial sound. Is that how you describe it?
I'm not exactly sure what it's called. I just think it's
Right. Of course, I wrote a paper on Blade Runner 2049, and I focused on the soundtrack of Blade Runner 2049, so it's interesting that you brought that up. Next, favorite soundtrack.
The Dark Knight.
The Dark Knight by, who's the composer off the top of my head? I can't remember.
I believe it was
Why can't I think of
Hans
his name?
Zimmer.
Yep, Hans Zimmer, that is it. Yeah, Hans Zimmer was, what do you enjoy about that?
Just the overall score just adds so much to the suspense of the film.
Right, Hans Zimmer, he's got a lot of good soundtracks on his resume, right? Inception is one that comes to mind as well, another good one.
He uses a lot of Shepard.
Okay, all right, excellent. A lot of organic sounds, maybe you could say, right? Like noises that he implements in his music. All right. Yes.
The Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 soundtrack.
All right. Okay, so this is like kind of like a jukebox musical kind of a thing going on there, right? You got the what are we talking about? Like 60s and 70s.
Like 70s rock, like 60s, 70s.
What's your favorite song in that soundtrack?
I can't think of one at the moment.
There's a lot of good ones. What's your favorite scene in the film?
Huh?
What's your favorite scene in Guardians of the Galaxy? What do you like?
Wait.
scenes in there as well. With Chris Pratt shirtless, that's my favorite, right?
It's like 2 hours worth of footage. I wonder if it's used my favorite scene.
Oh, that's a hard one. Too long. Yes.
Uh,
Are you agreeing with me that Chris Pratt shirtless was your favorite scene?
oh no.
Is that what you're gonna say? All right. Yeah, okay. We're coming with a new movie. All right.
Tron 2.
What was it?
Tron 2.
Tron 2. Excellent. Another great example. Tron Legacy. Right. So you enjoy that? Like, do you know who the composer of the soundtrack is? Daft Punk is the answer. Daft Punk. They are. They do have a cameo. They're in that club scene, right? They always wear the helmets. Daft Punk. Right? I do enjoy some Daft Punk from time to time. I do like that soundtrack. What else? Any other soundtracks that we enjoy? Yes.
Okay, so like, is it like the same, like, are we just talking like soundtracks or like scores, like the same thing?
So either or.
I got a couple, yeah, like Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones is a good one, right? Who's the composer of Indiana Jones?
John Williams.
Yep. Great. Excellent. Awesome. John Williams also famous for the score of Star Wars. Excellent. There you go. Excellent. One more. Yes. The Transformers. You enjoy the Transformers score, right? What is it? We've got a lot of Linkin Park in there, right? Excellent. All right. Let's move on to the next question. So right now we're talking about we're starting the first experiment with new technology that's able to capture sound with the images, right? We weren't able to do this before. So all the way up till now, we're talking about silent film. So if there was sound, it was most likely a live musical performance in the actual theater that accompanied it, or there was some other sound technology that was playing along with it. So the next question is, what were some limitations to sound capturing technology during this time period? Yes?
It would have had to have been captured separately because you can't get sound off of film.
Right, so,
Entirely separate technology.
right, so one of them you could. You could capture the actual sound, but the sound was converted into light, a light stream that was actually that was recorded with the pictures. Although that wasn't the style of capturing that became standard. Right? But sound on disc is, I think, what you're referring to, is that the sound was captured on a disc, and the video was captured, and they were playing when it was projected, they were played together. Right? Excellent. Yes?
Wouldn't, like, when you would record on set, like, sound, wouldn't it just pick up everything?
Exactly. Right? So you couldn't capture sound separately. So today, right, you can edit the sound and the visuals together. You can play with it and everything. But obviously, during this time period, you essentially have one mic, and you're capturing all the sound that was in the studio at the time, right? Which creates problems when you want a musical score. So if you wanted a musical score in your film, you had to have a live band in the studio playing, right? So if you can imagine, you have the scene and the camera's pointing to the scene, and then off to the side they would have a live band playing, right? And where you set up the microphone was very crucial because obviously you didn't want the band over playing on the dialogue, right? So it's kind of it was a tricky system that they had, a lot of limitations, which also made it hard. There wasn't a lot of creativity in the filmmaking process as well, because if you wanted to capture sound, there was a lot of limits on what you could actually do. What else? What are some other limitations?
Just the overall quality was not very good at the time.
Right, yeah, exactly. The microphones were omnidirectional, which means that it would capture everything in one direction, okay, rather than picking up everything. So if the microphone wasn't pointing towards you, it was not capturing the sound. Okay. What else? All right, let's move on to the next question. What are some creative ways early filmmaking incorporates sound to enhance the overall presentation of a film? Anyone think of any examples? Yes?
Maybe like for horror movies, like thrillers, using that type of sound to like give an edge or like
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. What else? Let's move on to contemporary films. Name a few contemporary examples of your favorite filmmaking that incorporates sound in creative ways. You have an example?
Yeah, have you seen Baby Driver?
Yes.
Yeah, like the movie has a soundtrack, and there's like a lot of action scenes where they incorporate certain sound effects with the movements and the characters' movements.
Yeah, and actually, this is one thing that I was going to show a clip from Baby Driver today as kind of an example of the difference between diegetic and non-diegetic sound. Does anyone know that distinction?
Yeah.
Between diegetic and non-diegetic? Go ahead.
Well, I know specifically in Baby Driver, every single piece of action in that film is choreographed with
Okay.
a soundtrack.
Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, what's diegetic and non-diegetic sound?
So like, if the music is like a part of the movie versus like not a part of the movie, just like we talked in the last lecture about how the narrator is like non-diegetic.
That's correct.
Yes.
Right. Now, okay, so now saying all this, many film scholars have been debating this for a long time, even if we need a distinction between non-diegetic and diegetic, right? So that distinction may not be necessary. But for the most part, diegetic and non-diegetic, so diegetic is all the sound that is supposed to be in the film world. So theoretically speaking, all the sounds that the characters can hear, whether it's the dialogue, whether it's a phone ringing in the scene, whether it's car noises from cars that are driving by, that would be diegetic sound. Non-diegetic sound is everything that's intended solely for the audience, right? That the characters are not hearing. When we talked about diegetic versus non-diegetic images, remember we talked about that last class, right? So non-diegetic is intended for us. Theoretically, the characters are not hearing the soundtrack. So the Tron soundtrack, for example, theoretically, the characters are not hearing the soundtrack in the film. Although some may argue that in that film world there would be music, right? Well, this is where this debate.
Like the club scene, because
Yeah.
the DJs are in there DJing in the club.
Right. So yeah. So that would be if we were making a distinction there, we would say in that case it dives into diegetic, right? But once again, is there a need to have these distinctions? And films play with this all the time. This boundary, films play with it all the time. So for example, you brought up Baby Driver, right? This is a great example of how non-diegetic and diegetic sound is sort of intentionally being blended into each other and playing with that boundary, right? So at first, and we're going to show that scene if we have enough time. When they go up to the bank, remember the very first scene when they're walking to the bank, you're seeing this upbeat music, which you tend to associate with a soundtrack, and then it shows him listening to the music in his ear, and then he's singing along with it, right? So it's playing with this idea of, is this music simply meant for us, or are the characters hearing it as well, right? It's playing with that distinction. And I'll show a couple of clips that play with that. But for the most part, diegetic is everything that's in the film world, and non-diegetic would be everything that's intended for solely for us as an audience. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. All right. So it might be best to think about there's three major countries that sort of take the lead on the use of sound in film. It's the United States, it's Germany, and it's the USSR. And I'm going to point to several notable films in each country, or for the sake of USSR, I want to point to one. The same thing with Germany, I'm going to point to one. Let's go ahead and do some, just want to make sure that I touch on everything that we discussed. Like I said before, the microphones were omnidirectional. They picked up any noise on the set. And I think I misspoke last time. I said that it only picked up in one direction. It's the opposite of that. It picked up everything. So everything on the set, everything that was happening on the set at the time would be picked up in the microphone. So you really didn't have a lot of control on, what noise choices, what music you were, the volume of each music, you had to sort of place it spatially. So if you wanted the music to be lower, you would have to physically tell the band, all right, quiet down, or put them far away from the actual dialogue, right? So it created a lot of limitations in early filmmaking. Obviously, you needed a microphone, which means that it really limited the action in the scene. So there wasn't a lot of like action scenes in early films that incorporated sound. You had to essentially be in one spot because just the limitations of the technology. So we're going to start off with the United States. So the very first film that we consider to be, the very first talkie, is what they call it, is The Jazz Singer. The Jazz Singer wasn't a complete sound film. It was primarily silent, with a few notable music scenes, right? So primarily a silent film that incorporated a little bit of, had some scenes with some dialogue and music in it, right? And this film became a huge sensation. People loved the music that was played, and they also loved sort of like the improving from Al Jolson in the scene, right? And I'm going to show the scene that I'm talking about here in a second, but yeah, let me actually just show this. This is from The Jazz Singer in 1927. Often credited for being the first sound or part talkie. Oh, I wanted to show this too. Okay, we'll come back to that. So here's The Jazz Singer.
Those would be multiple.
Oh, this is The Jazz Singer. that the jazz singer does have a blackface scene in it, right? And once again, whenever we talk about films that are successful, especially early on in film history, a lot of these successful films are incredibly racist, right? And I think that those two things tie in together. A film is successful because it has these messages in there that sort of, make white people feel better about themselves, right? And you can see that throughout history. So it is important to note that the jazz singer does have a blackface scene in it by Al Jolson, actually. What made this such a sensation was, and I actually didn't get to see some of his little improv, but in this film, Al Jolson does a little bit of like bickering with the crowd. He's sort of like hyping up his song. He's like, "Are you ready for this? Here we go. It's straight up work. You're ready for this?" Something like that. But people loved that, and that became sort of part of the sensation of this film, The Jazz Singer. Moving on. We'll go ahead and watch this. I was planning on showing this video first, but we'll go ahead and show it now. So this is a video essay on what sound can do for a film, and how sound can actually add some different messages and different affects to a scene.
There are a few ways that you can build up tension in a movie scene. Through camera work, through pacing, and probably most commonly through music. Like the music you're hearing right now in this incredibly tense scene from Steven Spielberg's 2005 film, Munich. Except, there is no music in this scene. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back up. We all know that movies have only two ways into your brain, through your eyes and through your ears. But if you've ever had the chance to edit a movie or a short film or even a small video, it quickly becomes apparent that when you're watching something, these two senses are weirdly interconnected. The visual side of film gets most of the attention because it's right in front of you, and it's usually what you remember after a movie is over. But in many ways, the visuals are simply the face of the operation, while the audio is actually the puppet master, the one that really holds the power. Okay, let me show you what I mean. Take a look at this scene right here. So what does Spielberg want you to pay attention to here? These people walking by and this car passing? No, it's not what Spielberg wants. It's what I want, since that was the sound design I just made for that shot. Here's what the actual shot sounds like. Besides being infinitely better, it's easy to notice how the sound really affects what you see and from what perspective you see it. In my version, the shot had an omniscient third-person point of view. In the real version, as soon as the audio starts, you're placed in a perspective. The first thing you hear is a conversation from street level. So even though the long lens is fixed on Eric Bana, you know the moment is taking place on the ground. Then to drive the point home, you hear Daniel Craig singing The Temptations. And the vocal recording is close, intimate, even though you never go inside the car. That's enough to put you there. Then the car that you're really supposed to pay attention to, the black one, parks, and the sound of it parking jumps out in the mix. Just like you wouldn't hear Daniel Craig in that way from where the camera is, you wouldn't hear the car that clearly. But the sound design picks these things out to tell a specific story. Stage shut up. The point here is that in film, you really do see with your ears more than you think. And sound doesn't mind that image gets the credit, because a key to the power of sound design is its invisibility. If dialogue sounds close, then you are close to the person who's speaking it, wherever they are.
My brothers were killed. My papa and my sister were both playing music.
Okay, so back to the sequence. Oh, yeah, forgot. No music. This 4-minute and 50-second scene is without music and almost entirely wordless. How does Spielberg and legendary sound designer Ben Burtt, who gave the world this, how do they build the tension here? Well, Burtt does it by building a bed of constant, noisy city ambience, then singling out and stringing together, like beads on a wire, key noises that tell the story. The background is that Eric Bana and his team are going to assassinate this man in his home by getting him to answer a phone that they've secretly installed a bomb in. The string of isolated plot sounds goes like this. The car with the assassins arrives. The dialogue of the target's wife and especially young daughter. Then their car pulling away, signaling it's safe to move forward. Then the coins and rotary phone that will make the call. Then the priming of the detonator. And then, wait, what was that? The first moment of trouble comes in sound. Up until now, the isolated noises represent the steps of the plan going smoothly. The truck passing by represents a break in that chain and a hitch in the plan. At this point, the ambience outside starts to take on some strange qualities. There's a high-pitched whine, like a train stopping on top of everything. And just like a moving truck blocks the assassin's view, the mover's talking keeps them from hearing the daughter's car pull back up to the apartment. She plays a key part in the scene, so Burtt isolates her again, but not her voice this time, her footsteps, which continue indoors. In the apartment, the ambience is quiet. And the really incredible thing about this scene is that Burtt and Spielberg build the tension not by working towards a great crescendo of noise, but by gradually subtracting elements. Once the daughter is up here, the danger can be signaled by a single sound effect. The important elements have been set up so well by this point that you could follow the rest of the scene without seeing it at all.
Oh, complètement.
Non, non, c'est ma crème. Allô? 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 Allô?
The climax of this scene, brilliantly,
Oh, commercial.
You could take your ulcerative colitis treatment in a
Ah,
different
cool.
direction. Talk to
is silence. But it's a silence that works so well because it anticipates the noise of an explosion to come. At this point, the ambience has become really impressionistic, and when it comes back in, it has echo and reverb. It's hurried.
All right, so I know that was kind of a long video, but I think it's a great demonstration of how sound can add things to a film. Things that you couldn't get just by simply pointing a camera and shooting, right? And during this time period, filmmakers are starting to notice that you can convey messages and you can add different affects to scenes simply by playing around with what you do with sound. Right? And I'll show a couple examples of that. All right, moving along. So let's go ahead and get to the history of the introduction of sound. I'll go through my notes to make sure I get this. So, Lee DeForest introduced his photofilm in 1923. This was a sound on film process. So what this did was, it converted sound into a light wave, and the light wave was reproduced onto the photograph strip. And then you could project both the image and the sound together, onto a screen, and you could play the film that way. Right? So that was the sound on film method, where you actually converted the actual sound into a light strip, and you played the two together. Warner Brothers also came up with their own technology, the Vitograph. This was a sound on disc system. So what this it recorded the image and the sound separately, and then you would play the two synced up together when you projected it on the screen. So two different ways of capturing both image and sound. And both were sort of competing with being the standard on how to play a film with both image and sound. So what ended up happening was there was competition on what type of technology they would use from now on. So what's often known as the Big Five agreement. So we have MGM, Universal, First National Paramount, the producers, distributing corporation signed the Big Five agreement, and what this was they pledged to whatever technology won out, they would all agree to adopt that technology because there were two drastically different setups for film and sound, and it was too expensive to implement both types into movie theaters. So this Big Five agreement said, whatever sort of wins out, we'll adapt and we'll use that. So Western Electric had a sound on disc, and RCA had a sound on film. The Big Five chose Western Electric system, which was the sound on film version. During the Depression, many theaters could not afford sound equipment, and many films released both sound and silent films. So although the technology was there to not only create films with sound and to project films with sound, this was during the Depression, and oftentimes it was a slow process. So oftentimes they had to either play silent films or sometimes they had the talkies as well. I want to play a clip from, let's see here, the first all-talkie. So this is often considered to be the first film that's the all-talkie, all sound. This is a film called, it's a crime drama film. Filmed on the Vitaphone, so this was sound on disc film. This is The Lights of New York, 1928.
What's up for the night, man? Yeah. And for all the business I did, I might have rolled them clothes up all day. You know, Eddie, we're wasting our time in a burg like this. Now, you take Kitty Lewis, for instance. She took a chance, went to New York City, and she's doing fine. Well, since they built that big hotel over there across the street, well, your hotel's not even made any expenses. Why don't you have a customer in there for hours at a time? Most of the hits in this town like to cut their own hair. Well, I'm sick of this burg, too. Now, listen, I've been to New York enough to know that I belong someplace where I can do something. Well, me too. Do you know that I'm the best barber in this town? Yes. Now, you take those two fellas at Room 21 that have been talking to us about going in business with them. They've got one of the best barber shops in New York City. What are we going to do about that? Are we going in partners with them? I don't know. I told Mother about the proposition. We've talked about it 3 nights already.
All right, so you can see not a lot of movement. It's point and shoot because of the limitation of capturing the sound. Next, I want to show a clip from The Love Parade in 1929. This is sort of I guess you could call it a musical.
Do you know the story of the Frenchman and the Parliament's daughter?
I know it.
I am the Frenchman.
You are not.
How do you know it?
I am your father's daughter. $399.
Thank heaven.
I wish we could have a cannon when we get married. Let's get married too. Make it a double wedding. Lucky!
Lulu, you're
I'm
clever.
not crying. I'm thrilled.
Don't get thrilled. Patsy, better wait for our marriage and see how they get on first.
There's no chance of their marriage going wrong.
Why, it even started wrong. What does that lady think she's marrying us? Trained poodle?
Alright, so let's move on. What do we have next here? Alright, so let's move on to the USSR. One noteworthy film that I do want to touch on is a film called Alone in 1931. This film sort of played with what you could do with sound, and one of the terms that's important for the exam is something called contradictory sound. Can anyone guess what that means?
Sound that doesn't make sense with what's being shown, or is like opposite.
Yeah, fantastic. So your sound that is not making sense with what you're seeing, right? And I want to show a clip from Alone, and we can put a little film analysis caps on, and we can talk about what this actually adds to the scene. This is Alone, 1931.
Как ответ? Алло. Алло, барышня. Алло. Ты? Суп с пирожками. Великолепно. Великолепно. Какие? Яйцами? Очень. А второе? Рагу. И компот. Или как? Не знаю. Ну, а как ты? Чего? А Лидочка? А няня? Ага. Целую. Да, целую. Пока. А? Да.
Alright, so there's an example of contradictory sound. So if we put a little film analysis caps on, what is this adding to the scene? Confusion is definitely adding this element of confusion going on. What else? What else is this adding to the scene? Panic, right? What else? What are we assuming we're hearing during this? Yeah, go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say, like, people will be questioning what she's actually saying on the phone.
Right, so it's adding a little bit of suspense there too, because we as audience members, we want to know what's happening, but we can't hear it, right? So, yeah, keep going. What else?
Maybe like the thought process, because like it seems like she's zoning out everything else, but we can't understand what she's doing, but we hear everything else that's all around her.
Yeah, good. And it kind of adds to that sort of that angst, that uneasiness to the scene, which wouldn't necessarily be the case if it wasn't for this sound effect that we're hearing. So as you can see here, film directors are starting to play with what sound can do, how it can add to the scene. Right? That was Alone. USSR. Yes.
Russian movie, right?
Yes.
Well, it sounds like it was German.
Yeah, this is a Russian film, USSR. What else about USSR? So the transition to sound came during the first 5-year plan. Remember we talked about the first 5-year plan? It was part of the third era of the Soviet filmmaking during the 1920s. Obviously, the Soviet Union was trying to expand the film industry. The Great Depression significantly slowed efforts down. By the beginning of the Soviet Union's entry into World War II in 1941, the introduction of sound was still not complete, right? So a big delay in the use of sound. Filmmakers of the montage movement welcomed sound as a way to add the image rather than duplicate the image. So rather than just having sound that is meant to sort of add on to the scene, so it duplicates the image, right? So you're seeing someone talking, and then you're hearing that person talking. Rather than doing that, so montage movement film directors wanted to add elements to the film that went beyond simply replicating what you're seeing in the scene. And that's the example that I gave you of contradictory sound in Alone. So let's move on to Germany. Two major film studios, or sound companies I should say, Tobis and Klangfilm merged together. They first attempted to block the sale of U.S. Equipment. Western Electric and Tobis Klangfilm settled an agreement stating that Tobis Klangfilm would sell to Germany, Scandinavia, and most European and Central European countries, and the U.S. would sell to Canada, Australia, India, and the USSR. A film that I want to focus on is a film called M in 1931. This is an incredibly iconic film, very influential. Many film scholars, there's actually someone in my, as part of my cohort, he believes this is the best film ever made. This is a film called M. It's a German film by Fritz Lang, 1931. It's about a child murderer, right? And what makes this film so notable, besides a lot of different elements of this film that makes it notable, is the use of sound. Primarily the use of a sound bridge. Can anyone tell me what a sound bridge is? Can anyone guess what a sound bridge is?
Between scenes.
Yeah, it's a sound that kind of bridges two scenes together, right? So if you're showing a scene and you're hearing the sound that will bridge you into the next scene. So you're hearing sound that you're going to see in the next scene. Right? That's called a sound bridge. So what I want to do is I want to first show some contemporary examples of sound bridges.
Ben, what are you doing?
Well, I would say that I'm just drifting here in the pool.
Why?
Well, it's very comfortable just to drift here.
I thought my jokes were bad.
You don't give a shit about anybody, and nobody gives a shit about you.
So you're seeing one scene, but you're hearing the door open in the other, indicating what's happening in the other scene. Here's another sound bridge.
I hear you now. I know what you've been doing. Stealing Papa's sleep while you live alone, and while night after night you sit at your computer. You're looking for him. You know, because I was once looking for the same thing. And when he found me, he told me I wasn't really looking for him. I was looking for an answer. It's the question that drives us here. It's the question that brought you here. You know the question, just as I do.
What is the matrix?
The answer is out there now. It's looking for you. And it will find you if you want it to.
Did you catch that? The alarm clock's starting to go off. All right, good. All right, so now I want to show this first opening sequence of the film M. Once again, it's a film about a mentally challenged, or mentally, not challenged, but mentally, psychologically challenged child murderer, right? And this is the first opening sequence.
Ihr solltet doch bloß das Lied nicht singen, habe ich euch gesagt. Könnt ihr denn nicht hören? Mal kannst du den ganzen Tag diesen mit verdammten Mörderlieder singen. Den ganzen Tag brüllt ihnen in den Ohren. Als ob man nicht schon genug von den Mörder zu hören kriegte.
Macht es doch. Solange man sie wieder hört, weht man nicht. Das hat doch was.
Naja, hast du wieder recht.
Sound bridge. Sound bridge.
Du hast aber einen schönen Bart. Wie heißt du denn?
Ellie Beckmann.
Ist Elsie nicht mitgekommen?
Nee, mit uns sind sie nicht mitgekommen. Dankeschön.
Neue Fortsetzung, Frau Beckmann. Spannend, aufregend, sensationell.
Nein. Unglücklich. Sagen Sie mal, Herr Gerte, haben Sie Elsache nicht gesehen?
Nee. Ist sie nicht gerade von mir die Treppe aufgelaufen?
Nee. Sie ist noch nicht zu Hause.
Na, dann wird sie wohl bald kommen. Auf Wiedersehen, Frau Beckmann.
Auf Wiedersehen, Herr Gerte.
Elsie? 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 Elsie?
All right, a pretty powerful opening sequence there. The whole film is available on YouTube if you want to watch it. It's definitely like up there in top 10 films you need to see if you want to be like a film maker or a film scholar, right? But what are some things that you noticed about this film that you enjoyed or you thought was interesting? Anything in particular? Yeah, go ahead.
Just all the symbolism used in it.
The symbolism, I mean, give me an example, great.
Like, for example, this ending scene with the ball rolling in the end.
Right, that's the ball that she had, it's sort of like it is rolling without her? Yeah, certainly, right, great, right. The empty plate, like the shot of the empty plate, right? Great, what else? Yes?
There's some foreshadowing in that song she was singing at the beginning.
Yeah, definitely, it had like a grim, like, song to it, and then it showed, yeah, exactly. Yeah. What else are some things you noticed there?
The lack of sound besides like the song is just clear cut, straightforward.
Yeah, exactly, right. Anything else? Did anyone like the shot of the shadow, just showing the shadow of the killer rather than his face? Aesthetically pleasing shot. Did everyone notice all the sound bridges that were going on throughout the film, right? Kind of sort of making it like connected.
I really noticed how it made the film feel rather modern considering when it was made.
sound bridges is something that we just accept as part of filmmaking, right? It just makes sense in terms of the continuity of the film. Okay. I wonder if I can find an image for you, just to kind of show you how him has influenced filmmaking. Let's see if it just comes up. No, it's not going to do that, is it? Come on, algorithm. When did it come out again? Yeah, 31. Oh, come on. Oh, here we go. It's not there. Come on. Oh, maybe it was the frown. It wasn't a smile, it was a frown. There it is. Does this image look familiar to anybody? Yeah.
Yeah, the Joker.
The Joker. I think the Joker is clearly influenced by this shot here. Right? The forcing the smile. Right? Good. All right, moving on. What do we have left here? Let me get my notes. All right, so I showed you the sound bridges. I do want to show you, because I did want to talk about diegetic versus non-diegetic sound. We sort of talked about that during the opening discussions, which was fantastic. But I want to show you how, film directors play with the boundary between diegetic and non-diegetic. So a couple of famous examples. This one is from Blazing Saddles. Any Blazing Saddles fans here?
What?
I think I already have it. Already queued up here. I guess I did have it queued up. So the whole joke, right, the whole gag is that we expect it to be like part of the soundtrack, and then there was a live band there, right? All right, so that's one of my favorite examples of playing with the diegetic versus non-diegetic. And as a reward, there's going to be commercials here. No, there's not. This is Baby Driver, the opening sequence, filmed in Atlanta. Baby Driver was filmed in Atlanta. Yeah, here we go. Here's the opening sequence.
So ladies and gentlemen, right now I got to tell you about the fabulous, most groovy Bell Bottoms. Bell Bottoms.
Alright, that was fun. Oh, wait a minute, class. Alright, so once again, exams open today. You may take it today if you want to, or you have the whole weekend until Tuesday by 11:30 p.m. to finish the exam. No class on Tuesday. I will see you on Thursday. Have a good one. Two viewers. All right. All right. You too. That's what I'm talking about.